All right, welcome back to the Random Redshirt Podcast, everybody. I am Zach, one of your hosts, and hosting with me, as always, is Chris. What's going on, Chris?
Hello, everyone. Great to be here again, Zach. And we're so thankful to have a wonderful guest today, aren't we? Thank you, Max, so much for being here. It's great.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, guys.
We
Yeah.
are beyond excited to welcome the amazingly talented and creative genius Max Cervantes to the podcast. You know, he's an actor who appeared as a recurring background character wearing the mustard gold yellow Ops Division in Star Trek The Next Generation. He's also appeared in Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country. He's a model maker, a prop maker, a costume maker for HMS Creative Productions Incorporated on Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Voyager, the pilot episode of Enterprise, and the Star Trek films Generations and First Contact. His work includes the fantasy adventure Masters of the Universe, Beetlejuice, the television series Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future, Babylon 5, Sequest DSV, and Earth 2, along with the science fiction thriller Virtuosity, the comic adaptation Batman Forever, the science fiction thriller Lawnmower Man 2, Beyond Cyberspace.
And Batman and Robin.
Oh, and Batman and Robin. Okay, there you go.
Nice.
Yeah. He was also worked on the short science fiction fan film Troopers and the science fiction blockbuster that now has a huge cult following, Starship Troopers. He hosts a podcast called The Max Effects, and tomorrow it's his birthday, so a very happy early birthday to Max. And Max, it's great seeing you again, and welcome to the Random Redshirt Podcast. Thank you so much for doing this.
Well, thank you, guys. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate your having me on, and let's have fun with this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You've got so much knowledge about all this different work that you've done in Hollywood and all these different series and different movies and everything. And we're ready to sit back and relax and listen to the information that you have and the stories and all the details that I know that you love so much. But I want to start out kind of like I do with a lot of other interviews that we've done, and that is from the very beginning. Like, when did you become a science fiction fan, and in particular Star Trek?
Well, I've always been a science fiction fan as far as I can think going back. I started really enjoying watching science fiction and fantasy and monster movies from sitting and watching TV with my dad on like Sunday afternoons when the local channels would be showing old science fiction movies or monster movies and fantasy movies like that. Some of my earliest things I remember seeing on TV were like the just amazing Ray Harryhausen movies like Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, Earth versus the Flying Saucers, and all of the wonderful old Universal monster movies like Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Dracula, The Wolfman, the Creatures of Black Lagoon, all of those. I grew up watching all those things because luckily here in Los Angeles, this was way before cable, children. You just talking about, over the air broadcast channels. Luckily here in Los Angeles, we had about a good 10 different channels we could pick up over the air. And many of these were local stations who would, fill their airtime by showing old movies and old TV shows and that sort of thing. But I do barely remember seeing Star Trek as a little kid as it originally aired. I don't remember any episodes or titles. The only thing that's stuck in my memory as a kid is seeing the Enterprise go flying by on the screen. I'm like, what is that? And it wasn't until years later when I was in junior high school and they started actively rerunning Star Trek, because by this time it had been canceled. It was now airing in reruns during the 70s every afternoon and evening, depending on where you were located. And I really got into it watching the reruns in the 70s. And from there, I started getting more into fandom. And I went to my very first convention when I was only 16 years old, way back in 1976. And that convention was called Equicon 76, and it was put on by John and B. Joe Trimble. And of course, if anybody's worth their salt in Star Trek fandom, you have to know who John and B. Joe Trimble are, because they're the people who started the Save Star Trek television campaign and were helped greatly by Gene Roddenberry telling them, here are the right people you need to contact, here are the right people to mail. here's the right way to approach them. Be nice, be courteous, just simply state what you want, which is that you love Star Trek and you'd like to see it continue. And because of their efforts, that's why we got the third season of Star Trek. Otherwise, Star Trek would have been canceled at the end of the second season, and that's it. And usually in syndication, you have to have at least 3 seasons of a show to get it run in syndication back then. And if they hadn't had the third season, we would have never gotten Star Trek in syndication. And God knows what would have happened. We would have never had anything else probably in Star Trek. So I went to that first convention when I was 70, in 76, I was 16, and I didn't have a car, but luckily my cousin, she had a car, and she was a big Star Trek fan as well. And my mom and dad only let me go because my cousin Georgina was going to drive. And so Georgina and I made the long trip out from where I grew up out in Corona, California, which is about 45 miles away from Los Angeles. So it was a 45-mile trip into Los Angeles, and the convention was held at the Marriott Hotel at Los Angeles International Airport. And the funny thing is, that hotel is still there to this day, and they still regularly hold conventions there. The big Doctor Who convention, Gallifrey, is held there every year. LostCon, which is the Los Angeles area science fiction and fantasy organization, they hold their convention there every year. And I just kind of started from there and just kept going to conventions and luckily meeting more people. And one of those people I met early on was a wonderful man by the name of Greg Jean, who I don't know how many of your fans out there might have heard of Greg. Greg himself is in the model making and science fiction movie realm. It's a legend. I mean, Greg built the mothership in Close Encounters. He headed the crew of building all the models and spaceships. And there's a lot of effects, models that you don't even realize are models in Close Encounters. There are some wonderful force perspective landscape miniatures that you don't even realize that they're models because they're so well done. And part of that is due to the cameramen and the lighting crews who just lit them just perfectly so that they would look completely real. And he was in charge of all the model effects for Spielberg's 1941. And Greg had worked on just tons and tons of science fiction and effects movies, as well as Greg himself was a huge Star Trek fan and science fiction movie fan. And through the years, Greg amassed himself a huge collection of original Star Trek props and costumes and set pieces and all sorts of other stuff from other science fiction movies and such. And when I finally, I met Greg from recognizing him in the pages of like Starlog and other magazines from back in the day. And I approached him and I showed him a model that I had, and it was an art show there at this convention. And I asked him, I said, look, I really want to know what you think of my work because I really want to get involved and be working in the special effects industry. So, tell me the truth. What do you think? And he said, well, I really like your model. It's well put together. It's well assembled. And he said, though, although for its scale, the weathering is just a little bit heavy. You need to think about your scale, how big the model is, and how big would these weathering marks would really be if it was full size. And the model in question was the old model kit of the Millennium Falcon that had been put out when Star Wars first came out.
I was just
And
gonna
he
ask
said,
that.
yeah, and he said, if you ever get to Los Angeles, because I was still living at home with my parents, if you ever move to Los Angeles, because you're going to have to do that if you want to try and get into the film business, give me a call. And he gave me his card. Well, a couple years later, I did indeed move to Los Angeles. And I called up Greg, and Greg gave me one of my first jobs after I'd moved to town. I was already working for a company that made plastic signage because I had studied industrial plastics in college, and I have a bachelor's of arts degree in industrial plastics and the chemistry involved in plastics and making things in plastic. And that first little job Greg had given me, um, was he had me make a whole bunch of little castings of these shuttlecraft, which had been used in the television series V, which had started off as two like miniseries movies, and then they actually went to going to doing a series of it. And there was about 50 of these little shuttles I had to assemble and paint for him. And after I got them all done and I delivered them to Greg, I asked him, it's like, well, Greg, what are all these little shuttles for? Are you guys doing like some big like shuttle base shot where you need them all seen lined up or something? And he kind of grinned and laughed. He said, no, actually, I'm giving them away to the people on the production company as little giveaways. And I learned a very useful lesson right then. He said, it never hurts to kiss up to the people who are employing you. And so he made these just to give away little trinkets. So
Well, that's great.
yeah.
I do know. I've heard Greg Jean was the guy that built, for example, I'm thinking Star Trek, the Romulan Warbird. I believe that
Uh-huh.
famous from
Yep.
TNG, which has
He
obviously
sure
been filmed
did.
a ton. I know he did a
Yep.
ton of those models.
Yep. He made so many models for Next Generation. Another one of my good buddies, Lou Zudavern, is also very, very incredibly talented model maker. I met Lou way back in the middle to late 80s. We were working for a theme park design company called Landmark Entertainment. And Lou eventually went to go work for Greg and worked with Greg for many years, building a lot of those filming models for TNG and for some of the other Star Trek shows. But yeah, Greg was a terrific guy, and unfortunately, he passed away just this year. He had multiple different medical issues, but he passed away just this year. So it was very sad. We had a big, huge memorial for him, and his ashes. He was cremated, and some of his ashes are going to be launched into space later this year. So
Oh,
he's
wow.
finally going to get to be out there amongst the stars, like he deserves to be.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. That's amazing, like how you got started and how you showed, your Millennium Falcon model to Greg, and then how that kind of connection was made and kind of got you started there and kind of got you and propelled you in that direction. So there was a lot of work that you did with models and
At the
modeling on.
beginning, yeah, I did a
Yeah.
lot more work with models at the beginning because on my second job, I went to go work for a wonderful guy named David Stipes, and his production company was in North Hollywood. And David had started off working in the business a long time as well. He had worked for Art Clokey, who had done a lot of the Pillsbury Doughboy, poppin' fresh Doughboy commercials. Because back then, of course, they were all done traditional, real hand done effects with stop motion puppets and everything. And eventually, Dave branched out and started and had his own effects company. And I went to go work for Dave. He hired me to go work for him on doing some model work. One of the first things I did for Dave was working on a TWA commercial of which I was made for the Super Bowl of that year. So one of my very first jobs was getting to work on a Super Bowl commercial for that year. And I looked it up, and sure enough, that commercial is still out there. You can look it up and find it on YouTube.
Wow.
And it was called TWA Leading the Way. And I built this 3 foot long tail section of a 747, and the ad agency out of New York was being really, really picky about how much detail they wanted to see and everything, to the point that they kept a 747 down at LAX airport. And I had to go down there and was put in a cherry picker and go up and take photographs of the tail section of this 747 so I could make sure I got all the seam lines and the rivet lines and everything just right, and so they could film this tail section of a 747 for the commercial. And then I had to build a full model of the full airplane, but that we used an off the shelf model kit because, of course, time is money, and we had to get this done fast for the Super Bowl. But again, then they wanted a full interior put into this 747 model. So I had to paint and put in all the chairs. Thank God we didn't have to put people in them, but we did put pilots in the cockpit. And we're like, you're never going to we're never going to see these people or everything. They like, We don't care. We want it just, and that's at the point you just shrug your head and go, well, they're paying the bills, so you do what they want, And we built this model city and Dave came up with this great, amazing way of filming it. The shot was looking up at a skyscraper, and in the skyscraper's mirrored facade, you'd see the building fly by, but also in the reflection of the building, you'd also see the sunset. So basically, it's like the sunset is happening behind you, and you're looking up into the darkening sky behind the building, and you see the reflection of the airplane fly by in the reflection in the mirrored tower. And Dave figured out a way of doing all of that in one camera pass without any optical work. And it was amazing. I think I have some pictures of it up on my Facebook page. I'll pull them for you guys so you can see them. Um, I got to work on my first feature film over at Dave Stipe's shop, and that movie was one of Val Kilmer's very first movies called Real Genius. And for that, we built a suborbital attack shuttle called the SR-82, which is seen at the beginning of the film. And then I built a model of a B-1 swing wing bomber that is seen near the end of the film. And that was a lot of fun. And I got to go to set to see some of the sets in the way, because that they would do things on set. There's this amazing effect shot that they did physically live right there on set, where they fill a room with popcorn, because if you've seen the movie, a laser beam is fired down at this house. It bursts through some stained glass windows and it hits a giant Jiffy Pop popcorn popper that the students have built inside this guy's house purposely to blow it up and fill the house full of popcorn, because they know he hates popcorn. And to have that happen, they actually brought in a small jet engine and used it like a hot air popper, where they literally just poured popcorn into its afterburner, instantly popping it and blowing that popcorn into the set. It was just amazing. I didn't see it happen, but I saw all of the setup, so I knew how they were going to do it. And then when I saw the film, I was like, that's amazing to think that they just did that live. Because nowadays they would just do it in CGI and it wouldn't. I don't know. I am a fan of CGI, but I also understand that everything has its limits. And if you can do something live like that, I think it's infinitely better if you can do something live like that. And then if you have to, go back and sweeten it and fix little things here and there with some CGI. But so I was really lucky. I did a couple of low budget movies for Dave Stipes over there. We did a low budget film for Roger Corman's company called The Stuff. It's basically a kind of a horror comedy film starring Garrett Morris from Saturday Night Live. They find this yogurt like material in a cave, and they start mining it and find out, oh, it's edible. Not only is it edible, but it tastes great and it helps you lose weight. And they start selling this stuff. And this is where the horror element comes in, because then they find out, oh no, this stuff is alive. It's not helping you lose weight. It's eating you from the inside out.
Oh my.
Yeah.
I should
Oh
say,
my is right.
as Takei would say, oh my.
Exactly. And so a group of people who find out about this set upon themselves to destroy the mine to prevent the evil company that's selling this stuff. And we made a large miniature of the mine, and then blew it up for the film. And nothing ever goes right the first time. And although it did go off right the first time, they wanted to give the director multiple takes so that they could make sure it was exactly what the director wanted. So we blew the model up, I think, like 5 times. And we didn't do it with explosives. We did it with compressed air. We had a couple of tanks of compressed air, and they would turn the camera on. But of course, you're filming this with high speed film, so you hear the camera crank up and you hear it like start off slow, and you hear this As the engine, as the motor, of the electric motor of the camera is just racing, and just feet and feet and feet is just going through the camera incredibly fast. But that's so that when it's played back at normal speed, it will look slow and it'll look big. And that's why you film things in high speed to make it come out slow when you project it back. And then once they would get the camera to speed, Dave would yell fire, and somebody would hit this valve, an electric valve, which is a solenoid valve, which releases all the air tanks and it just blow air out of the different places that we had built into the model. It would just blow the cave of the walls of this mine away. But then after everything's done and the smoke clears, they'd call strike, and you make sure everything's fine, you make sure the camera's fine, and then there's the slow, arduous process of resetting everything, which meant sweeping everything up, getting all the rocks up. And this is not a huge miniature. There was a 18-wheel tanker truck placed in the model to give a sense of scale, so people would see that and go, oh, okay, I know how big an 18-wheel truck is. Now I know how big this cave, this mine is. And then I would have to spend like literally a whole day then rebuilding the cave, because you're literally, since you want everything to blow apart quickly and easily, you just stack all the little rocks back on top of each other and use just a little tiny bit of white glue so everything is glued back together, and then you're filling it from behind with you know, other little styrofoam rocks and pebbles and sand and all this other stuff. And then when you're all done with it, you spray it with a little bit more, a mist of white glue, and then dust it with some more dirt and throw some little branches and twigs and stuff on top of that to cover everything up. So you're spending a whole day to set it up just to destroy it again in a matter of seconds.
And that was multiple
And
times.
yeah, and that was multiple times. I think we did it at least 4 or 5 times.
Holy
just to
smokes.
get that one shot, you know.
Wow.
But it worked and the director loved it. So in the end result, that's all that matters. Because if the director loves it, you know, you're going to get more work hopefully out of these people again. So
Yeah. Well, Max, we'll get into, you know, Star Trek and some of the other big feature films you've been a part of. But this movie is a big fan favorite in my house. We watch it every year around Halloween. I know we talked about it in Vegas when I met you, but we love Beetlejuice, and I know you worked on that. And
Yes.
I mean, I'm a huge Michael Keaton fan. He's my Batman, and so I'm wondering if you could just tell us about some of your work on Beetlejuice. I know that the story you told us in Vegas about the hat that you made that he wears was just incredible. So maybe you just kind of share your time working on that movie.
Sure. Well, I worked on Beetlejuice at a different shop that was over at Bob Short Productions. Bob also was a good friend of Greg Jeans. They were buddies for a long time. They had both worked on Star Trek: The Motion Picture. It was like, from what they told me, every single person in town who could work in the effects business was working on Star Trek: The Motion Picture to get it done in time for its release. And Bob had his own shop at this time. Bob had done the cocoons for the movie Cocoon, as well as he made Daryl Hannah's mermaid tail for Splash. And we got the job to work on Beetlejuice. And for that, you know, there was a lot of stuff to be done. There was no CGI back then. There was a lot of optical work back then, and a fair amount of stuff was done through simple sleight of hand tricks. Early on in the film, there's something that we built for the film that is so incredibly simple that most people would never even think about it nowadays. After the couple come back and they discover that they're dead, because Barbara goes and picks up a plastic horse that's sitting on the mantle, and she picks it up, and you can see her, I mean, you can see the horse, moving, but you don't see her reflection in the mirror. And it was done so simply because they turned the mantle around, so they're actually looking through the glass as if it was without the glass, without the mirror. So you see her, you see the two horses move, but you don't see her hand in the reflection. And to do that, the two horses are actually attached to each other with a pole, a small length of black plastic rod, and the one horse is blocking the long rod that's connecting the two of them together. So she just picks it up on which she moves it, and she had to do it very carefully so that the one horse is blocking the view of the other one. And it's such a simple little thing, but it was so effective, and it was really quick. So that also helps. Um, I was tasked with building lots of other things. There was a sculpture when Beetlejuice is with Lydia in the attic, and he's trying to get her to say his name, and they're going through the little game of charades, and of course he can't tell her. She's got to figure it out for whatever reason. He's not allowed. Ghost rules, who knows.
Yeah.
He can't tell her, and he points to one corner of the attic, and they do this whip pan, and suddenly she sees there's this giant beetle that looks like it's like 6 feet tall sitting in a chair in a corner of the attic, and it lifts up one of its little antennae and arms and waves at her and turns its head and goes, "Hey, how you doing?" uh uh that giant 6 foot beetle was actually about 8 inches tall. We built a little attic in scale to it, and the beetle was a sculpture done by somebody else, and then I had to mechanize the sculpture so that on cue he could turn his head and raise his arm. And again, incredibly simple. I drilled a hole through the beetle all the way through its body and put a rod out the bottom, which went through the chair, which went through the bottom of the miniature set, and the head was simply put on a rod. His antennas, I cut the antennas off, and I put some really flexible plastic on the pieces of the antenna. So when he would turn his head left to right, the antennas would wiggle. And that's what we like to call free animation, because the antennas are being animated simply by the motion of his head. And then same thing with his arm. I cut off his little arm, and I threaded some fishing line down it, and the arm was also built with a little armature so that when I would pull on the cord of the fishing line, his arm would raise up, and then his little hand, his little claw on the end, I cut off his claw and I glued a little tiny piece of rubber band right there. And then I painted the rubber band so it would be the same sort of blackish green color of the rest of the beetle. So again, he would raise his arm, and the animation, the movement, just the inertia of lifting the arm makes his hand, his little claw wiggle back and forth. So he looks like he's waving. So between the whip pan, because in the whip pan, there's actually a crossfade in there. Crossfade from the live action set where Michael Keaton as Beetlejuice was with Lydia to the miniature of the attic. And it's so effective. Most people don't even notice that they're not seeing the real attic. They're seeing a miniature of the attic. Um, and then of course the
That
big ticket.
that little beetle scene is really funny too. It's, "Hey, how you doing?" Whatever. That's great.
And it's so quick, it's so effective, and
Yeah.
it's the way most comedy should be. It's short, it's sweet, it gets the point across, and then she sees it, she's shocked, and they go on with the story. She goes, "Beetle," and he's, yes, 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 keep going, and then scene continues. But the real big ticket item I got to build uh, was, of course, the hat. But before even the hat, I had to build some radio controlled systems that went into Barbara's mask when she stretches her head out and her eyeballs fall down her throat, and her tongue is all hanging down her mouth, and it's super long. Somebody else had sculpted the actual mask, and then they did molds and cast one and painted it up, and then it came to me so that I could fit it with radio control mechanisms, which I got to meet Gina Davis because we had to make sure it fit on her right, and that it didn't impede her vision, and that she could see out of it well, and that she could breathe decently. And to do those things, the back of the throat is sculpted in a cartoon style, with ribs and whatnot. Every other area between the ribs, we cut it out, and so that she could see through it. And then we glued a piece of black wedding organdy, like veil, so she could see through it. In a weird way, think of it like Geordie's visor on Next Generation. LeVar Burton can see it because the rods are really close to him, and he can see between the rods. Same sort of deal. Since the mask, the back of the throat is really close to her eyes, she can see between all the little spaces where we put in the ribs, and she can see and breathe through the thin black fabric. And then there was a cable line going down the back of her neck, down her back where the radio pack was, to the small of her back. And the tongue was made. I made the tongue so the tongue could flex up and kind of go into an S shape like a snake. And Burton liked it, but then they were like, maybe we shouldn't have it do that, because it was a little too sexually sort of, you know, writhing about this snake-like tongue in her mouth. And so he decided, let's just have it move just a little bit, just a little bit, to make sure it looks alive and whatnot. But the eyes were really controlled so they could look left and right and whatnot. And then was the big ticket item I just was chomping at the bit to get started on, which was the carousel hat. When Keaton comes back in the black and white striped iconic suit,
Yep.
near the climax of the film, and he comes up through the floor of that miniature set that they've dragged down from the attic, and he comes out, and you see the beginning of the carousel hat. We actually built two carousel hats. Mike Moore was given the task of building the first one, and it was really just an umbrella. We took a store-bought umbrella of the right size, we painted it black and white, and it was only going to be seen for a split second as it came up through the model. And so it could unfold. You see the beginning of the shot of it coming up through the floor and then beginning to unfold. And that's it. That's all it was made for. And then in editing, they cut, and then they go to the full hat, the full mechanical hat that I built, which actually, it spins. The little carousel monsters go up and down as it's going around. There's a pair of bat wings on the sides of Keaton's head, which flap forward and backward. There's like over 500 individually wired in light bulbs on the hat itself. Because remember, kids, we didn't have LEDs back then. Yeah. We only had incandescent lights. And then way up at the top, if you look very carefully, there's a little tiny skull, which looks a lot like what we would now recognize as Jack Skellington.
Mm-hmm.
And sitting on top of that little skull is a little tiny bat. The skull and the bat had to stand still and keep facing forward while the carousel is spinning around it. And the whole carousel and all of its action of raising and lowering all the little creatures is being done by one motor at the very center of the carousel hat. I had gone out to the Griffith Park here in Los Angeles, and in Griffith Park, there's a beautiful old carousel, and it's been there for a long, long time. It's actually very important to the history of Disneyland, because Walt used to take his daughters there on Sundays so they could go and play, and they could go on the carousel. And he sat there watching his daughters having fun on the carousel, and that was where he thought, you know what, there needs to be a place where parents can go with their children and enjoy themselves just as much as their children are enjoying themselves. And that's where he got the idea for Disneyland. So I went to go see this carousel to see how a real carousel is built and how it works. And from that, I adapted some of the ideas of how to make the miniature carousel that he was going to have to wear on his head. And when I had a meeting with Tim Burton, the director, and Rick Heinrichs, his art director, on the project, and I asked him, well, what does it have to do? What's it going to look like, and all this stuff? And for anybody who's ever seen the way Tim Burton draws, his drawings are sketches. They're wonderful, these wonderful little sketches, but they're not exactly engineering drawings of what you could build something from. So I had to interpret his sketches into something that could really be built. Not only that, but that would be light enough so that it wouldn't be burdensome on his head. And to help that out, the actual carousel hat, when it was all done, probably weighed maybe 20 pounds, which sounds like a lot, but he's not actually wearing it on his head. Michael Keaton is not, it's not resting really on his head. He's not bearing the weight of it on his head. We had a bust of him in the shop because early on, since we knew we were going to have to build some stuff that was going to have to fit him, um, our very talented mold makers, they took a mold of him from like middle chest up of his whole head and shoulders and whatnot. And I took a piece of aluminum bar and I heated it up gently because you can bend aluminum pretty nicely if you heat it up beforehand. So I bent it so it should be the shape of the profile of the back of his neck. And then we attached that to a backpack and harness. So the carousel hat is actually resting on his shoulders. And then the bar going up the back of his head is holding, hello? Oh, okay. Is holding him up. Um, and so,
Y- you know, I was, I'm glad you shared what you did with between what Tim Burton sketched and the other gentleman and your meeting with them because I was curious about that like you've built this beautiful carousel hat piece and that process of like understanding yeah what is it supposed to do, is there a lot of like is there a lot of back and forth and kind of brainstorming amongst all of you, like yeah, tell us what's this thing actually supposed to do, like how does that process happen?
well, yeah, because, you know, Burton wants it to look the way he wants, which is great. And I'm more than happy to make whatever the director wants be what he wants. But it's also got to function in the real world. So sometimes you have to make compromises. And Rick Heinrichs, the art director for the movie, was great at that because his job is to make Tim Burton's vision real,
Mhm.
you know, and so that's obviously very important for the process. Um, and so yeah, you just adapt things, and he was great to work with, you know, so it would look great on film, and it did, thank God.
Wow. Wow, that's some
So the,
yeah, that's awesome.
the next time you see the movie, just remember I am laying on the floor at Tim Burton's feet. There's a cable coming down the back of his pant leg. And as he's going up, I'm getting off stage, you know, orders saying, okay, cue the motors, cue the lights, turn this on, turn that on. So the next time you see it, just remember I'm laying on the floor there underneath it all, operating it.
Wow.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, that I will. I do want to see that again. I kind of I vaguely remember those parts with Gina Davis's character and what you described and then the carousel hat. So that'll be amazing to see.
I
Uh,
know. Oh, sorry, real quick, Chris. I was just gonna
yeah.
say, this last Halloween when we watch it probably 2 or 3 times every year for Halloween, and I was telling my kids, I was like, yeah, I met the guy who was controlling the hat, and we stopped it and looked at the thing. That's so cool and everything. So that's pretty neat.
Yeah, that's great. You know, I was curious, like transitioning from movies to television. I'm sure there probably is a difference in the time, you know, how much time you have to do the effects for maybe TV. But I know one of Zach's favorite projects that you've worked on is Sequest,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
DSV.
Uh-huh.
I
Uh-huh.
remember seeing it myself. Was pretty cool. But like in terms of like how you work on the television, um, you know, series and like what you create and what you create for a series, is there a lot of difference in between them, or you know, how does it?
There is, in the sense that mostly it's a case of how much time you have.
Mm,
On as a case in point, on Beetlejuice, I had 2 months to build the carousel hat. While on a show like Sequest and even Star Trek, we usually have a week to build something. From the time we get a drawing from the art directors in the art department, usually about a week to build something. Now, for a pilot, you have more time because you're having to build a lot of stuff because you're getting ready to film the pilot. And then once a show goes into series, you usually then have about maybe a week to build something, you know, after that. And when we did Sequest, the
mm.
show only ran for 2 seasons. The first season was filmed here in Los Angeles, and then Universal decided to ship the show out and film it in Florida, thinking they were going to save themselves some money. And so we built all the principal props and stuff for the first season, which got reused for the second season. We
Good.
built their communications device called a VPAL. We built their stun guns. I built this portable, uh, kind of like a laptop before there were laptops. You see this, no, it's very small. It was about the size of a video cassette, but it unfolded and the screen folded up out of it. And it really worked, meaning the screen really worked. I mean, the keyboard didn't work. The keyboard was just a static, graphic, but the screen really worked. We found a company that was making a television, but with a very quick, a very early LCD flat panel display, and it was made you could watch TV anywhere where you'd get a decent signal. And when we opened it up and looked at it, um, we discovered that we could there was a cable attached to the flat panel, and it was just long enough that we could work it in so that the screen could fold open and actually still keep functioning. And that was a one of a kind. We only built one of it because that TV was not cheap. That little portable flat screen color TV was not cheap. It was, but in it back then it was like $1,000, which was very expensive, and that's why we only built one of it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's
There
a
was lots of other things we built, for those are the three primary things I remember.
Yeah, $1,000 back then would be a lot of money today.
Yeah, way a lot of money today.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that would be crazy. I'm curious. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about, or you've talked a little bit about Beetlejuice and getting into this business and your passions for science fiction. Um, there's a show that I love, and I've noticed from fans, it's one or the other. There really isn't a lot of in between. It's either you love this show or you hate it, and that's Babylon 5. I love Babylon 5. I'm a huge fan. I think it's really a very underrated sci-fi series. It doesn't get enough love, and I'm curious to hear about your work on Babylon 5 because I believe it was running about the same time that DS9 was running, right? I know there's some
Yep.
similarities between the shows, so maybe you could talk about your work on Babylon 5.
Um, well, I personally didn't build a lot for Babylon 5. We built some things for Babylon 5, but I thought the show was fun. I thought they were, very underfunded for what they were trying to do. Because you have to realize, it was made by Warner Brothers, but they weren't giving a lot of money because they didn't think much of it. And it wasn't even airing, on a big network. It was like on TBS on cable. And so it was kind of underfunded for what they were trying to do with the show. Um, but yeah, we built the guns, we built little badges, lots of little stuff. I mean, it was amazing how much stuff we built. I do remember there's a funny sort of like not intended to be recognized crossover between Next Generation and Babylon 5. They didn't have a lot of money, and the prop master came to us going, "Hey, we need to build this spacesuit, but we don't have a lot of money. What do you have that we could reuse and make into like a spacesuit uh, stuff for the show?" And Mike looked around through some of our old vacuum form molds, and because we basically made like a chest harness and backpack thing, and the costume department made the jumpsuit, and they got a helmet from somewhere else and such. So it was really like a kludge together kind of, and they only needed to make one, for this episode. But the chest box that the person is wearing on that spacesuit, it's a vacuum formed copy of Dr. Beverly Crusher's portable med kit that she would take on away missions. The thing that she would pull the tricorder out of the side and open it up and take like her hypo and whatever medical tools she needed inside it. It's Dr. Crusher's medical kit reused. I mean, it's not an actual one. We had a vacuum form mold for vacuum forming the body shell. We vacuum formed the body shell, repainted it, and added some more stuff on top of it. But the basic shape is Dr. Crusher's med kit from Next Gen.
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I can't remember the name of the or episode number. I just remember we did that, and we're all kind of like giggling under our breath about that.
That's a combination of the two universes of Star Trek and
colliding.
Babylon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we got away with doing a lot of funny little stuff like that, mostly on Deep Space Nine, because there was being so much alien stuff and you're completely in an alien environment to begin with. You know, uh, I don't know if you guys have heard the story that all of the Gold Press Platinum has our names on it. When we got the artwork from the art department, the bars are meant to be held right side up, like like a refrigerator, you know, the tall ways up. But if you turned them sideways, you kind of squinted, the alien writing starts to look like English. And it is. And if you look at it kind of closely, then you can see that it would have people's names on it. The big size bar said Bear and Dana for Bear Burge, who was one of the prop makers that worked at HMS, and his girlfriend, Dana. The medium-sized bar said Mike and Shauna for Mike Moore, my boss, the owner of HMS, and was also called Proper Effects, and his wife, Shauna. And then the smallest size bar says Max and Scott for me and my first husband, Scott Adams. And we made hundreds of these things. And it wasn't until a year later, the property master, Joe Longo, came into the shop and was very upset. He goes, "What the hell's with these coins, these bars? I can't use these. These have people's names on them." And Mike took him aside and goes, "Joe, you've been using these things for over a year and you just noticed. Do you think anybody at home on standard definition TVs is ever going to see this?" And then the truth came out and he goes, "Well, yeah, I guess, but how come you didn't make one with my name on it?" That's the real truth.
Jealousy. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Did you at least get to keep a bar?
Oh, I have one of every shape, all the different sizes. I have one of all the different sizes in my collection.
The bars, the
Uh,
strips, the slips, all
yep,
that.
yep. And the brick,
The brick, yep.
the very large brick, that was done by that was done much later in the series run. The tiny little slip and the brick were both done much later. Mike Moore did the tiny little slip, which is about the size of a stick of chewing gum, and
Yep.
the brick, which was really massive, that was done by my buddy Scott Brodeen. But those came about later, like the case that the orb, the Bajoran orb of prophecy, would be kept in. It has some funny little inside jokes on it. Around the rim of the glowing orb, on a jewel on the front, it says, "Not Indy's Ark," as in it's not Indy's Ark of the Covenant.
Right.
And in some of the
That's great.
stones, the stones were arranged so that they read "No Kill I," which is
Yeah.
a inside joke to the classic Star Trek episode Devil in the Dark, because
Yep.
it's something the Horta engraves in the ground when he's communicating with Spock. "No Kill I." So we had lots of fun doing all sorts of funny little inside joke things because you could get away with all this alien stuff, you know. There's an episode where early first season episode of Deep Space Nine where the crew have to engage in this weird fantasy game as if they've been pulled into another direction.
Yes.
And I think
Move
it's
along
called
home.
Move Along Home, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
The game pieces on the game board, when we first see the game board, there are all sorts of funny little inside jokes. Some of them were designed by the art direction team, and some of them we came up with. One of them is the monolith from 2001.
Yeah.
Another one is the Guardian of Forever from the classic Trek episode City on the Edge of Forever. So there's lots of funny little, watch the episode again and look at the game pieces, and you'll see there's lots of them are funny little inside jokes to other things. So yeah, we love doing little funny little inside joke things like that. The Bajoran pistol, Bear used to sign everything with, like, because his nickname is Bear, so he would sign everything with a little bear claw. He sculpted a little flat graphic of a bear claw on, and it's on the underside, on the backside of the trigger, so you wouldn't generally even see this on camera, but it's there and it's on the gun. You know, so we would do funny little things like that all the time. I made a. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, it makes you wonder if D Space Nine ever got HD like TNG did, which I've heard isn't probably maybe never gonna happen, or at least not for a long time, because CBS didn't make the money they wanted, I guess, off of the TNG Blu-ray release. But if DS9 ever got like the full-on, upgrade to HD. I wonder how many of those little things would stand out.
I don't know. I think they might more so. I know some of the other things I built, they would not, the little things I put in them would not stand out. Because like there was a Klingon hypo I made for an episode where a Klingon woman drugs Odo, not Odo, drugs Quark
Yeah.
and forces him to become her husband.
Husband, yeah.
Grilka.
And yeah, Groka. And on the Klingon hypo, the button that you push to supposedly inject somebody, it's a hexagon shaped button because for some reason that Klingons like using hexagon shapes and such. And there's a stylized Klingon symbol on it, but it's the letter M for Max, which also conveniently could stand for medicine. So there you go. But you would never
Nice.
see it in the episode because she's got her thumb on it when she uses it on Quark. Uh, uh, we liked doing little funny little inside joke things. There's tons of them in it. But yeah, I really enjoyed my time working on Next Generation, both as an actor, as an extra, as well as I was building some props because I got to work on the last two seasons of Next Gen because I left Next Gen as an extra, as an actor in the middle of the fifth season, and that's when I went to go work for Mike at Proper Effects, and then that also then led into us starting to do Deep Space Nine because Deep Space Nine started, like during the fifth and sixth season of Next Gen. And there would always be that overlap of 2 years, two shows being on at the same time.
Were you with DS9 throughout the entirety? I guess
Yeah.
after you got there. Okay, so
Yeah.
you were.
Yeah. I was with DS9 though for its entirety, and then for most of Voyager, and uh then the pilot of Enterprise. But after that, I was kind of getting tired and burnt out, and I left the film business for a while. I went to go work for a toy company, which uses all the same sort of skills in building toys, except for you're not expected to build a toy in a week for
Yeah.
mass production. Uh, but speaking of toys and mass production, though, when Playmates was doing the toys way back originally, the toy Bajoran tricorder that they put out is actually 1-to-1 real size to the actual screen used one. For once,
Interesting.
the toy company actually reached out to us through Paramount and they rented an original screen used Bajoran tricorder. And so the toy is exactly the right size.
Hmm.
That's
Uh,
cool.
yeah. Uh, and so it was kind of cool to see something we had built as a prop actually made as a mass produced toy. They made a Bajoran phaser, but it's downsized. It's kid size because even as a prop, it's a little on the big side. But you know what? We build it the size they want it. So although we did later build a sort of a Derringer, a Bajoran Derringer, which was for Major Kira, and it's quite a bit smaller, and she liked it because it was smaller and it wasn't so big and bulky and what. But sometimes you have to build something on an incredibly short schedule. There's a episode later, about three-fourths of the way through the run, we had to build these big, massive Bajoran assault rifles,
Mm.
uh, and we had to build like 15 of them in less than a week. And
Wow.
that's a case where, okay, everybody's weekend is canceled, everybody's staying here, we're going to be here 10, 12 hours a day if not longer because we have 15 of these rifles we have to get done. And I believe there was 12 what we would call hero rifles, which are real pretty, they're meant to be seen in close up, and then 3 stunt rifles which were had to look exactly the same, only we made them out of a lightweight foam material so that they could be dropped, they could be used for stunt fighting, you could hit somebody with it and they're not going to get too busted up over it. And that's a case of you then have to just parse out the work to different people, and everybody's building some piece of it or involved in it. Like I was making all the little detail panels, and then Bear was involved in making the base main shape of the rifle. And then as soon as I was done with one little piece, I would turn it over to somebody in our mold department who would then box it up and mold it and make a silicone mold from it. And as soon as that was done, they would demold it and start casting parts. And those parts would then go on to somebody else who would do all the cleanup and the prep work, and then start painting all the parts. Because we had to do this in such a short amount of time, we had to get something done and out, ready, so that things could then just keep everything flowing. And then by the time Bear had the main body done, that could then get molded and cast. And then by that time, all the little detail parts were ready to then just be glued on top of the big rifle, so we could have them all done. And again, I have a picture that I took that I posted on my Facebook before, where you can see like all these rifles laying on the floor on top of a piece of clean brown paper just before they went to set. And it, after a while, having to do those sorts of long hours and everything, it gets really old.
Yeah.
You get really tired of it. And like I said, I after a while, I'd had a little bit too much, and I quit and I went to go work for a toy company. And I worked for them for like 5 years, and I slowly got back into the business. But working in the toy industry was a lot of fun. Because again, you're not having to do all those killer hours to get something done. It's not as satisfying as getting to see, objects made up on a TV screen or on a big movie screen. But that gets to a point where, being home at a regular time is worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was so D Space Nine is my favorite Star Trek series, hands down. Chris knows how much love I have for that series. I mean, I love all the Star Trek series. I grew up on TNG more than DS9, but I love D Space Nine. So from one massive D Space Nine fan to you, thank you for all your work on that show to make
you're very
what it
welcome.
was, because
You're very welcome.
I think it had the best writing, the best story and character arcs of any of the Star Trek series. And I'm biased because it's my favorite show, but it's absolutely a treasure of a series.
Well, I certainly think it deserves a lot more attention than it gets,
I think it's getting more now because of the world we live in with streaming. People can quote unquote binge watch now.
Yeah.
And so D Space Nine was ahead of its time because it was the way it was written, the way they did it was so different than the new adventure every week like TOS and TNG was.
Right.
And so you couldn't really binge it back in the day, but now you can. And now that people can binge it, they're like, oh my gosh, this series is amazing,
Yeah,
and so
it's incredibly deep.
It really is. And it's quote unquote darker than some of the other series, but because people can watch it the way they can now, they're starting to realize, man, this series deserves a lot more credit. So I think people are starting to come around and realize how good that series actually is.
Right.
Yeah, it is an amazing series, and to echo Zach, I know the work you all put in on TNG and DS9 was we know it was a lot of work, and us that are fans, thank you so much for all you did for that. That's awesome.
Well, thank you very much. But of course, it wasn't just me on the crew. There were lots of people beyond me who was just working there. But yeah, so you have to work as a team to get all this stuff done in time and still have it being of good quality.
Yeah.
Well, your hard work and long hours, we have benefited from over the many years and decades of watching this amazing show known as Star Trek. So
right. I just want to forewarn you guys.
Yeah.
I just had a little thing that popped up on my screen saying my phone is low on power. So in case we should lose connection because my phone goes dead, just be forewarned, and then I'll put my phone on the charger and we'll go from there then.
Yeah, no worries. We can always edit it out. So I know there's been a ton of other stuff you've been involved with in Hollywood and working behind the scenes and things like that. I know Chris was going to ask about a different set of movies, but really quick before he does that, I was wondering if you can talk to us and tell our listeners about the droid builders group that you're a part of, because everybody's heard of like the 501st Legion and a lot of these other cosplay groups. And it's funny, we just did an episode on cosplay about a week ago, and the droid builders thing is very different from some of the other cosplaying groups. So maybe you could talk about that, how you got involved, and kind of what goes into this other than the obvious, what goes into the whole group of being a droid builder.
Well, first of all, I appreciate you noticing that. But yeah, I've been member of the R2 Builders Group, which is how it started. Gosh, at least 15 years, and and the droids they're not a costume, so they're just objects, and we think of them as they're giant radio controlled toys, because who wouldn't want a giant radio controlled toy of R2D2 or whatever droid is your favorite, and it's a lot of fun. I mean, I've always loved building things ever since I was a kid, and so it just seemed natural because R2 is my two favorite characters in all of the Star Wars movies is R2D2 and Boba Fett. I know,
Oh,
weird combination, but
yeah.
those are my two favorite characters, R2D2 and Boba Fett. And so when I had the opportunity, I was very lucky and I got to study an original screen use R2. And that meant getting to take pictures and measurements. And then eventually, getting involved with this other group of all these other fans who were doing the same thing. We started off online as a Yahoo group.
Yeah.
Okay. That tells you how far back it's because Yahoo groups don't even exist anymore. And we had, would get together with meetings and sharing information, showing parts we had built. And it's been a lot of fun. I've met and have a lot of really good friends of mine who are some of my best friends that I met who are members of the R2 Builders Group. And we take our droids out to conventions for fun, just because other people love seeing them, especially little kids. There's nothing that makes me happier to see the incredible smile on some little kid's face when they see, this droid come rolling up to them and they're like, oh my God, it's real, because our droids are built so that they can make sounds and interact with the kids, and it's a lot of fun. We've even taken them out to like museums and children's hospitals, and we don't charge anything for it. We do it for the fun of it, just to make the kids happy. And I kind of look at myself as like, yeah, I'm 62 this year. I will be 63 tomorrow. And I just think of myself as a giant kid. I'm just a kid who's got the best toys.
That's excellent. Yeah.
And you know, uh, I just this last year for Star Wars Celebration, I made a droid suit, a costume for myself because I'm old enough that I don't call it cosplay because I do not play in my costumes. It's a costume I like to wear, but I do not play in it. So I do not cosplay, I costume.
There you
But
go.
from the old Star Wars comic book, there's a character I was always fond of. And these were the old Marvel comic, Star Wars comics that came out after New Hope came out and before Empire Strikes Back came out. And in this, Luke, Han, Leia, the group, they are being chased by the Imperials. They take refuge and hiding on this giant space station called the Wheel. Just so happens, coincidentally, the guy who owns and runs the station was an old friend of Leia's father. And so he agrees to hide them. And one of the first things they do is like, well, we got to hide your droids. People might notice them. And so R2 and 3PO are put in the custody of this big, bulky blue droid who is basically the station manager. He runs the station for his owner. And the droid is called Master Com, like Master Communications, Master Controller kind of
Mhm.
deal. And I always liked the look of him because he's this big, bulky droid. And in the comic, it's mentioned very briefly that he had been originally built as a cargo lifting droid, which is why he's this big, bulky thing. And his owner decided to use him because him being this big, bulky robot, he felt it would be more intimidating and less likely that different people would try and take advantage of him as compared to like some, droid like 3PO, where like, well, people just, ignore him, just go past him. But when you've got this big, bulky, droid, people are less likely to ignore him. And I
Yeah.
saw the design, I go, I could do that. I could wear that because I'm not some skinny little, you know, Anthony Daniels like person. I'm a big husky built guy, and I could do that. And so it was something that I always wanted to do. And before Star Wars Celebration, I spent a very intense 2 months building this droid suit for myself. and everything is handmade by me. The whole suit is basically vacuum formed, with the exception of the knees. I have a good buddy of mine, Gordon Tarplay, who has costumed as 3PO for many years. And Gordon's quite the whiz at 3D modeling, and he had modeled his whole suit. And he 3D printed the knees for my suit by basically measuring my leg, blowing them up to be the right proportion, and then printing them out in ABS filament for me. But everything else I sculpted and vacuum formed and made the whole suit myself. So that was kind of like bringing a long-term dream I've wanted to do for a long time, finally making it real.
Well, I saw when you
Yeah.
posted it on social media, and it's really fantastic. It looks
Oh, well, thank
absolutely
you.
incredible.
And I'd heard a lot of Anthony Daniels horror stories about how difficult it was to wear the suit. And knowing that, I sort of like engineered my suit to not have those problems. Like, he can only see a really tiny area. When if you look at 3PO's face, that little black dot that's in the middle of his disc of his eye, that little black dot is all he can see through.
Wow.
That's it's not much bigger than a pencil eraser. And I'm like,
Jesus.
I'm not doing that shit.
Yeah.
I'm a little claustrophobic, so my droids, his full eye is a mirrored lens. I took them out of a pair of sunglasses, so I can see very well through uh, the helmet, as well as I built the suit so I can actually sit down. Poor Anthony Daniels, he can't sit in his suit. They had to build him a special lean board so that he can basically lean up against it between takes to try and relax himself. But he's still standing, still all that pressure on his feet all that time, you know. So, but yeah, it was fun to engineer my suit to be more comfortable than what I'd heard poor Anthony had to go through in wearing C3PO.
And with with Star Wars and transitioning, thinking about Star Wars, because Zach mentioned earlier, and you mentioned earlier too, you worked on the fan short films Troops, right? So which
Yes.
I think they're still on. We can see them on YouTube. They're
Oh
probably
yeah,
still up there.
it's still up on YouTube. I had several friends of mine who were students at Art Center of Design here in Pasadena, California, and they were still students when they made that. And they approached me going, "Hey," because they knew I was building an R2,
Yeah.
and they asked, "Could we borrow it and use it?" Well, he's not anywhere near being done. It's just a bunch of fiberglass parts, and they were like, "Well, we're going to be filming this in like a week and a half. What do you have?" And I looked over on my shelf, and there in my workstation, I said, "Well, I have this," and they were like, "Well, what's that?" I said, "Oh, it's his name is Tom Servo. He's from the TV show Mystery Science Theater 3000." And they're
Oh
like, and they
yeah.
were like, "Okay, well, it's all we have, so we'll go with what we have." And so they used my Tom Servo, and that's how in the video it's the Jawas are caught stealing Tom Servo. It wasn't written in, it wasn't intended. It was just the happenstance of they needed a droid. The only thing I had was Tom Servo, and because they didn't have any choices, they used it. But actually, to me, I think that makes it actually funnier,
Yeah.
you know.
And I'm sorry, let me back because I did not know that at all. So the Tom Servo from Mystery Science Theater is from you? Is like
Oh no, no, no. The one that is used in the fan film Troops, I
okay.
built.
Okay.
No, I didn't build the one used in Mystery Science Theater. I had gotten to know the guy who built them for Mystery Science Theater because I'd been a big fan and I saw his
Yeah.
name in the end credits. Guy's name was Jeff Maynard, and I saw his name in the end credits. And back then, you could just pull out the phone book and look somebody's name up, and I found where the production company was, and I called information. And because again, at the end credits, they stated the show was filmed in, Minneapolis, Minnesota. So I just called and asked for information, and I asked for the production company, and I got the number and called and talked with him. So we became friends in that manner. And when they had their first convention, I went out to go visit just as a fan, but I took my Tom Servo with me. And so I got to go visit the sets of Mystery Science Theater 3000, where they filmed in a little suburb of Minneapolis called Eden Prairie. And this was not a real studio. It was filmed in a warehouse. They use two adjoining warehouses, and these were not big warehouses either. They were like maybe, oh, I don't know, I'd say about maybe 25 feet wide each unit, and they just filmed in the middle of the two of them. But I have photos of my Tom Servo with their Tom Servo on the set when we got to go take a tour of their filming location. There, it was a lot of fun.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Now, now the projects you've like worked on, like whether they were movies or or TV or things that you've done personally. I mean, is there a favorite, like maybe it's hard to say, but is there like a favorite like specific project or or prop or model that you have done?
Oh gosh, and there's so many.
Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
a lot of favorites. That's the problem. I have a lot of favorites. Um, well, going back to Deep Space Nine, one of my
Yeah.
favorite things I did from Deep Space Nine, there's an episode where Worf's brother, Kern, decides he's going to commit suicide because of some sort of social faux pas that he's made Klingon wise. And I got to make this beautiful Klingon dagger that he commits suicide with. And that has an interesting story to it because, again, short timeline to make things. Mike had a meeting with the prop master, Joe Longo, about building this knife. Mike gave him a price. The prop master said, well, that's a little bit much. Maybe I'll just have the people repaint something we already have. And Mike said, okay, that's your prerogative. I mean, you're the prop master. You get to make that decision. And then almost a week goes by, and then Joe calls back and goes, you know what? The director really likes that dagger, and he's willing to pay what you want for it now. And Mike was like, well, that's fine, but now it's going to be double that price. And Joe just went into a rage over it, was yelling and screaming. I could hear him yelling at Mike through the phone, and Mike was in the next room because Mike's office was right nearby mine, where my desk was. And he goes, look, I'm going to have to pay somebody to be here overnight because you want it on set tomorrow. And after that person is done with it, they're going to be no good to me for the next several days. So, rush jobs cost more. And since I was kind of the Klingon expert there at the shop, after he agreed to it, he said yes. Mike came out and they faxed us. Yes, children, this was in the age of faxing. They faxed us a illustration of the dagger, and it was drawn by John Eves, and it had measurements telling me how long it needed to be. And then we Xeroxed the fax because old-fashioned Xerox is on thermal paper and it doesn't last
Mhm.
forever. We Xeroxed it to make I'd have something to go from, and then I basically blew it up the right size and went from there. I made the basic blade shape out of T65 aircraft aluminum, which is it's used because it's strong, durable, but it's also a little on the soft side because it's slightly flexible, which is what they want for aircraft purposes. So things flex under stress instead of snapping. Um,
Yeah.
and the whole blade, there's a tang going all the way through the handle. The handle is all made out of plexiglass sheet layered on top of each other, glued to get leather. Excuse me, I had to burp. Glued together, and then I by hand using a Dremel carved all the shapes into the handle. There are some Klingon glyphs, letters that are carved into the metal of the blade, which I had to do by hand with a Dremel and a tiny little ball cutter. And I changed the glyphs though. I had been given a alphabet sheet by Mike Akuda from the graphics department. Mike's an old friend of mine as well. And it basically says, this is A, this is B, this is C, this is CH, and the whole Klingon alphabet converted to English. And I changed the glyphs that they had. I put my initials on the blade on one side, and the company's name, Proper Effects, is on the other side. And on the handle, I carved everybody's initials because in the middle of the handle there's this large gold oval, so everybody's initials in the shop there, everybody's initials is on one side or the other side of the dagger. And it was getting very late. It was like early morning. It was like getting I had to have it there on set, finished, done. by like 7 in the morning, and it's like 4 in the morning, and I'm very bleary eyed. I'm exhausted, and I still haven't finished the very bottom of the dagger. And on the bottom, there's this very ornate sort of ball, which on a dagger like that, they call it a pummel ball, because if you haven't killed somebody with the dagger itself, you can pummel them to death with the round ball that's on the end of the dagger. And I was looking at this thing, it's very ornate. It's got all these fluted shapes on it. I'm like, I'm running out of time. I don't have a time to make this thing from scratch. What do I have that's laying around the shop I can use? And I happened to look over at one of my other friends' table, and he had a mold for the top of a bottle, which was it was the same type of bottle head that had been used on the old TV show I Dream of Jeannie.
Mhm.
And it was this very ornate sort of half rounded fluted shape with all these very interesting intercuts. He already had a silicone mold sitting there, and so I grabbed the mold, went to the casting department, poured up a resin copy, cut, and basically turned it around. The part that went into the bottle is what became the actual end of the ball. I cut off the stem. I glued another plexiglass dome on the end of it, and I drilled a hole in it. I put some threaded a steel rod into it, and then I drilled a hole in the bottom of the dagger, and I mated the two pieces together. So the top of Genie's bottle from I Dream of Jeannie is on the end of this Klingon dagger.
Oh, that's cool. It's a clash of I
Yeah,
Dream of Genie and Star Trek and
yeah,
Klingons all together.
exactly. And then, so I got it all done. I got it all painted. And where I was living at the time wasn't too far from Paramount Studios, because Paramount's in Hollywood. Paramount is one of the few studios that's still in Hollywood proper. And where I was living at the time was in West Hollywood. So it was only about maybe a mile, not even a mile away. But I was exhausted. So I had to deliver it on set. I bring it to Joe Longo. He looks at it. He doesn't say hello to me. He doesn't say hi. He doesn't say anything. He just looks at it. I hand it to him. I go, here you go, Joe. Here it is. It's all done. He looks at it, doesn't say anything to me, puts it down and walks away. And I'm just befuddled and like, what the hell, dude? I just spent all night making this thing, and not even so much as a, oh, thanks. Oh, that looks nice. Oh, well, there's craft services over there. Why don't you go get yourself some coffee before you go home? Nothing, nothing. And that instantly set me against him for the whole rest of the time I ever had to work with him or for him. It was like, oh, it's for Joe? No, you give that to someone else. I don't want to have anything to do with them. Because really, I do not need to be treated like some piece of garbage because whatever reason he's got. That's his problem. My job is to make what I am asked to make and get it done on time.
Yeah.
Whatever problem you have with production for whatever reason, that's your problem. But it's not fair to put that garbage on me. I stayed up all night building this thing for you. You could have shown a little bit more,
Appreciation.
yes,
Yeah.
Yeah, for
anything,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, all the other people, I never had any other problem with anybody working on Star Trek other than that one person.
Mm.
Our other prop master was awesome, Alan Sims, because both Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, because they had so much props in the show, they had two prop masters. So Alan would do an episode, and then Joe Longo would do an episode, and then Alan would do an episode. Because this way, each one of them got twice as much time to prepare for the show.
Mhm.
And Alan Sims, he was awesome. He never complained. He was great to work with. That's how I have an original screen use Sword of Kahless in my collection.
Whoa.
You can still see the blood on it from when it was used.
Wow.
And it was due to Alan being such a great guy because he brought it back to the shop. I really need this fixed. I need it on set tomorrow. What can you do for me? And I said, well, Alan, you're very lucky because I already have a casting sitting right here. I'll tell you what, I'll fix up the brand new casting because it's ready to go. It just needs to have some paint done and the leather straps put on it. And then you can have it. And it's brand new, good to go, you know, rather than me fix up this one because
Yeah.
the screen used one was kind of screwed up. Some of the
Mm.
rubber tips were broken off and torn, and the paint job was a little scuffed up. So, and it's rubber. You never let an actor handle a real
Yeah.
sharp weapon.
I was gonna say they weren't using metal. They would have done the metal clinking in post production, right?
Yeah, that's always added in post production. And so he was overjoyed. He said, "Sure, here, take it. Just give me the good one." And so I did. I finished up. I had the other one put together for him in a couple hours, and then he took the replacement. And because of that, I have the screen used beat up one hanging
Wow.
in my collection.
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, it's crazy too. I am really curious, Max, what your thoughts were in 2006 when the Christie's did the big Star Trek auction and the amount of money that some of that
Uh,
stuff was going for. I mean, it must have been, I mean, for someone who worked on these series and handled all these props and were around the sets and everything, you must have just been absolutely flabbergasted by the amount of money this stuff went for.
I was, because I'm like, really? You just sold such and such for such amount? I didn't even get paid, half of that. I wished I had gotten paid
Yeah.
that much for what Paramount just sold it for. You know,
Yeah.
it was just amazing to see how much money they were getting for all the stuff that we built. It was amazing. It was just,
Yeah, Trekkies are die hard, man. They'll pay good money for stuff like that.
yeah. Well, some Trekkies
Yeah,
will pay
that's
that,
true.
because
That's true. Not
those
all of
sorts
us
of
have that kind
Trekkies
of
are,
money. Yeah.
yeah, not all of us do, but yeah, but there are obviously enough really rich Trekkies to be able to pay for that stuff, and more power to them.
Yeah.
More power to them. I wished I had gotten paid that much. You
Right.
know.
So I want to kind of finish up as we do this interview with you with talking about your time working on the Batman movies. And
Uh
then
huh.
maybe if you could talk a little bit about Starship Troopers. I know Chris and I are big fans of Starship Troopers. He's a big fan of the author of the original book. And I'm really curious to hear some of your anecdotes from working on both Batman and Starship Troopers.
Well, Batman. Uh, I didn't get to do all that much stuff for Batman. Some of my stuff were smaller, more minor pieces. Like uh, in the Batman movie with Val Kilmer, there's a scene where he receives this golden box, and it's a puzzle, and he opens it up, and it's like a game of tennis, and it goes back and forth. And one person made the box, another person made the radio control materials that went inside of it. I had to hand carve these beautiful little question marks, the Riddler's question marks, and then cast them up and then put them all around the perimeter of it. But I sculpted the original. I like working in plexiglass, and I sculpted them all out of plexiglass. And then I had to make the Riddler's cane, and then they wanted us to make, and they were gold chromed. Uh, uh, and then they wanted us to do a stunt rubber one, and they wanted it gold chrome so it matched. I said, you don't want to have this thing chrome, because if the chrome should crack, that metal plating is going to be sharp. It's like you're throwing around a razor blade. And we said we can make one that will look fine for the quick shot, because all it was going to go quickly through the shot as the Riddler swings it and hits somebody in the head. It's during the scene where they break into Bruce Wayne's mansion on Halloween night. And but they were like, no, no, he wants it chromed. I was like, okay, so we chromed it, but we made them sign papers saying, look, if anybody gets hurt by this thing, this is just to prove we warned you, and we are absolved of any responsibility, because we simply built it the way you wanted it to. And then later we built this great big game, which we called the Battleship game, kind of like the old kids game Battleship, only bats. And where the Riddler and Two Face are playing this game where they're exploding, things in the water as Batman's trying to race the bat boat through to try and come to save the day, and yada yada. And
That's a
then
great scene.
Two Face is putting these game pieces up on this clear plexiglass board, and they're and we we're trying to explain to production. It's like, no, 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 magnets don't work on plexiglass. What the kids are like, oh, you can just use magnets. I was like, no, no, magnets don't work on plexiglass, because they wanted us to put magnets on the back of the game pieces. One of our other guys in the crew sculpted and made the game parts that were going to go up on the screen. And we said, you can't do that. That magnets don't work on plexiglass. And so we just simply used dots of double stick tape so they could pull them out and put them up there. I built the main case of the Battleship game, and then I installed the electronics in it. Another person did the brass frame to it, and another one of our guys, Steve Horst, who was later Mike Moore's co-owner in HMS, did all the electronics for it. Um, we made like the brain drain devices that they would stick on the Riddler would put on people's heads to drain their brain of all the memories that he wanted to extract out of them. There's so many things that we made for the different movies. But yeah, it was a lot of fun working on those. They're a little over the top, but hey, what are you going to say? It's that's what the director wanted. So
Yeah.
you give the director what he wants. Case in point, Starship Troopers, the director Paul Verhoeven, he was pretty amazing to work with. That he was very intense. He really knew what he wanted. Uh, we had a production meeting with them about us doing the suits for the army, and they showed us what they had built. It was myself, my friend Bear Burge, and then one of our other co-workers at the shop, Regina Pancake. We had this production meeting with Paul Verhoeven. He shows us what their people had made and said, "Can you do something like this?" And I looked at it. I go, "There is no way in hell you're going to get any of the actors, and especially not the stuntmen, to wear this." And they're like, "Well, why?" He says, "Well, one, you made it out of quarter-inch thick rubber, sheet rubber, thick, heavy, solid, quarter-inch thick rubber. And then they pop riveted these metal plates to it, while the heads of the pop rivets are facing inward. So they would be up against a person's skin or their shirt or whatnot. And if you fell while wearing that, that would hurt. It'd be like being jabbed with a bunch of needles or like a ballpoint pen tip or something." And he's like, "Well, what's your idea?" I said, "Well," and I very quickly threw out to him what we could do, because we had used this material that we use for making all of our stunt weapons, like our knives and daggers or rifles out of. And it was a synthetic urethane elastomer. And it came in two forms. It came in as a liquid and also as a foam. I said, "Look, we could make molds of the shapes, and we'll do one run of just the solid material, and then we'll back it up with foam of the same stuff. That way, it'll be lightweight, it'll be flexible, and the stuntmen can wear it, and it will protect them, as well as the principal actors can wear it, and it'll be lightweight, and they won't complain about it." Because no matter what people say, actors like to complain. They like to complain that this is uncomfortable, that's uncomfortable. And so you try and make everything so it's as comfortable for them so that they can wear it. And he liked my idea. And he said, "Okay, I will fund having a prototype suit made. And if it meets with my approval, you guys get the job." So we had 1 week. We went back to the shop. I started sculpting all the parts out of heavy, dense urethane foam. I vacuum formed over them with some really thin plastic so it would get rid of the cell structure of the foam. We vacuum formed over it again with some really thick plastic. And then we used those really thick plastic vacuum form parts to pour our prototype suit out of. And then we would back it with foam, and then we made the prototype suit. And then a week later, we took it back to them, and we had a meeting with Verhoeven. And then this other gentleman was there, this guy, this actor. I didn't know who he was, kind of a short, stocky built guy. And he had me put the suit on the actor fellow, who then kind of grimaced about it and complained and say, "Well, it doesn't fit right." And I said to him, "Well, it's because it's made to fit. I sized it to fit me, and I'm bigger than you." And he kind of gave me this dirty look about that. Actors are very, you know, shall we say, careful about their image to others, especially this particular guy. Turns out this guy was going to be the lead in the movie. Do you remember the name of the actor?
Casper Van Dien.
Yeah,
Rico.
it was him.
Rico.
It was him. It was him that I had to then, and I showed him and the director, "Look, this is how quickly you can readjust them. Just pull on these straps, pull in, and it pulls the suit in so you can readjust it to fit many sizes of people." And because we had made it so it could fit like people who were like 6'3", 6'4", all the way down to smaller sizes,
That's a great
just
idea.
by pulling on the straps.
Yeah.
And then it being made out of a soft foam urethane material, it was very tough. It was durable, but also if you fell backwards or landed on it, it was cushioning still. And the director loved it. He had Casper Van Dien do some tuck and rolls to show how mobile and flexible he was. And he asked him, "What do you think? How does it feel?" He goes, yeah, I like it. It's comfortable. I didn't feel anything when I fell back on the floor or anything like that. So we got the job. Then we found out we had to make over 500 of these suits of armor, and 500 also meant helmets. So we
Oh,
made all the helmets and we made all the armor.
wow.
Another company, because we were so busy, another company did like the rifles and guns, because we're not, because they wanted these rifles to really fire blanks, and we don't, our shop didn't do that kind of work.
Hmm.
You have to have special licenses to do that kind of thing, and we didn't have that. So we made all the helmets and all the armor for the actors and all the background people.
Well, all that armor and those helmets and everything in Starship Troopers really have kind of become iconic. I mean, if you look at the Starship Troopers franchises, particular that first movie, it's really become a massive cult classic in the sci-fi world. I know Chris is a huge Paul Verhoeven fan.
Yeah, yeah, I like I like the movies that he's done. You know, RoboCop and Starship Troopers and
Of
Total Recall,
course, yeah,
especially. Yeah,
yeah. No, they're a lot of fun. They're really fun films, and I was very happy, and I very felt very lucky that I got to work on something that's become such a fan favorite, I guess you would say.
It really is. Yeah, it really is a fan favorite. I love that the mix that they had of practical models and effects with special effects, CGIs and everything. I think they did a good job of mixing that and making that movie, what it became.
Yeah, they did. They did. There's a lot of really great model work in the movie, as well as some great CGI, which just blends together really well. And that's what I mean about having the best of both worlds. You've got this great CGI that works great with the physical real models, which works great with real people. And yeah, that's a good way of going. To do it. Don't do it on any one way singularly. Do use all the tools that it takes to make the movie be the best it can be.
Yeah. So I have one more final question for you, Max. I know Chris probably does too, but my final question is, and this may be a tough question. I don't mean to put you in the spot about it, but do you have a favorite Star Trek series, or do you like them all for different reasons? And if you do have a favorite series, maybe why?
Um, I'll just come out and say it. The original series is my favorite because, again, that's my Star Trek that I grew up with. And as far as like even the original cast movies, Star Trek: The Motion Picture is my favorite. Uh, it is the most like a pure Star Trek episode because there's no enemy. The only enemy is ignorance and not knowing, and it's the grand adventure of going out to find something that we know nothing about. What is V'ger? It doesn't act or react like any way of anything we've ever met before, but yet we have to find out some way of figuring out this puzzle. Otherwise, Earth will be destroyed. No ifs, ands, or buts. It wiped out a fleet of 3 Klingon cruisers as if it was just swatting a fly. It absorbed and destroyed a whole space station as if it was a speck of dust on its way past, you know? And just for that reason, I really love Star Trek the Motion Picture. And no matter what anybody says, it made a ton of money. The motion picture made a ton of money. The only reason why the movie went over budget as it was, through a bit of Paramount's creative financing, they placed the cost of all of the post production, because there was going to be a Star Trek TV series before motion picture happened.
Phase 2,
And
right?
then it was going to be a TV movie of the week as well, before they decided, no, this needs to be a big budget motion picture. And they put all of that other production costs onto the tag of motion picture. Why?
Mhm.
Because financially, then they get to write it off as a loss by doing
Ah,
so.
I didn't know that.
So
Interesting.
yeah, and if it hadn't been for Star Trek the motion picture, they wouldn't have had the sets to have done Wrath of Khan or any of the other movies after that. And if those movies hadn't been a success, we would have never had Next Generation
Or anything. Yeah,
or
that's
anything else.
true.
Yeah, after that.
Now
Yeah.
I know you picked up the XO6 Admiral Kirk. Well, it looks like we lost Max,
I
so
think his
we'll
battery must have gone out. Yeah,
yeah,
we'll
we'll edit this piece. I'll edit this piece out. But man, he's
Yep.
got so much information, Chris.
As good as possible. And so I'd been helping him out with a lot of information, as well as connecting with other people. Whatever I didn't know, I knew other people who would have the right information, who could help him out with those things, to the point that down the line he is going to be releasing a Lord Krug from Star Trek 3.
I saw that.
Yeah, you like
Oh,
that,
it looks
huh?
good too.
Doesn't it though? Well, I
Yeah.
helped him out with a lot of research. That I had photos of Lord Krug's outfit while it was hanging in wardrobe from during my time of working on Next Gen. I got to be very friendly with the wardrobe people, and they let me get some pictures of Lord Krug's outfit while it was hanging there. And
Wow.
as a bit of trivia for everybody out there, Lord Krug's Klingon outfit from Star Trek 3 is the same one that Michael Dorn wore a few times in Next Generation before they're like, you know what? This outfit is really too small for him. We're just going to have to make him one for himself that's
Wow.
his size. Because, Christopher Lloyd is nowhere near as big as Michael
Yeah.
Dorn. And so, yeah, they had, but for the first couple of times that Dorn ever went in full Klingon, he's actually wearing Lord Krug's outfit from Star Trek 3.
That's incredible. I did not know that. That is an
Yep.
awesome piece of Star Trek trivia for sure.
Yeah.
One that most people probably don't know.
Nope. And yeah, most people don't know. And again, I'm a big Klingon fan. And back in the 80s, I made myself a full Klingon costume. And having seen the originals in wardrobe, I was able to ask the people in wardrobe all sorts of questions. Where did you get this from? Where did this come? How was this made? All this stuff. And so I used all that information and then other research I gathered on my own to make my own costume. Like I went to the company that where they bought the leather from. And that color gray leather came from a company here in Los Angeles, in downtown, in the garment district, a place called McPherson's Leather. And so I went there and I bought my leather hide from the same company where they had bought theirs from when they made them for motion picture, and then made them more of them for Star Trek 3, and then even more of them for the other then Next Generation era shows. Uh, I had I got to borrow a pair of original Klingon boots through a costumer friend of mine, and I took them to a bootmaker I use who's in East Los Angeles, a place called Duran's Boots. And this company, all they do is they make custom shoes. Anything. You bring them photographs, or whatever, and they can make custom shoes. And making custom shoes is kind of like a lost art. Almost nobody does it anymore. But this place will make anything you want. Mind you, it's not going to be cheap, but they can make you anything you want. Um, and they made my Klingon boots for me, completely lined in calfskin, and they're completely leather boots all the way, and they come up over the knee. And I'm not a really tall guy. I'm not short, but I'm not tall. I'm only like 5'8.5". So I had them put lifts in them, so I'm almost 6 foot in the boots. So at least I'm a little bit taller Klingon. But yeah, and Nanjing stuff from Exo 6 is just amazing. It's
It
just
really
amazing.
is. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
got a few other of the figurines from the other series pre-ordered. Like the Quark looks incredible.
Oh, doesn't it though?
It really does. I think I've got I just bought the Janeway. She looks really good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, XO6 is doing some amazing things, and that's really fantastic to hear that you had an opportunity to work with him and kind of help support that company by doing that research and being that. So
Yeah.
for those of you listening, if you see the Kolinar Spock out there, or the Admiral Kirk and these other figurines, just know that Max helped do the research on those.
Yeah. And there's going to be another motion picture figure coming out, but it's going to be later in next year, not anytime soon. And it's going to be McCoy from motion picture. But Nan jokingly refers to that outfit as Disco McCoy. It's the white jumpsuit that he's wearing when he
Yeah,
first appears in the transporter room. And
with the beard, right, and everything.
yeah, with
Yeah.
the beard and
Yep.
everything. And he's wearing this big gold medallion around his neck. And he's got this great big gold buckle. But the funny thing is, you don't see him down low enough to understand he's actually wearing cowboy clothing. Because the story is that McCoy left Starfleet and retired and was back home in the South where he's originally from, and he had a horse ranch. He's wearing cowboy boots, but you don't see them in the movie.
That's funny.
So it's like literally they beamed him up from his horse ranch in like
Disco
Georgia.
Cowboy McCoy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, everybody jokingly said disco because they see the big gold medallion on his chest and the big gold buckle, and they think, oh, because it was the 70s. It was
Right.
the era of disco where people wore such gaudy things.
Yep.
There. Oh my God, I have seen pictures of like the Admiral Kirk from Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan in the landing party coat. I'm like, wow, if I didn't know better, I would think that was a photograph from the movie because they're just exquisite, just beautiful figures.
I did see the 3 Wrath of Khan figurines that they're planning on doing in the
Yeah.
future with Kirk, McCoy, and Spock in those monster maroons, and they
Yeah,
are incredible. They look the detail on the actual uniforms looks so good.
It is. It's so good. I mean, Nan's attention to detail is just far above anything I've ever seen before in a 12-inch figure like that. Because I'm not a big fan of cloth on action figures unless they're big enough. And luckily, a 12-inch scale or 1/6 scale figure is big enough that cloth can look good on them. You know, for that reason, Migos are okay, but I don't like the way cloth looks on a figure that small. You know, my favorite up until X06 brand new figures, my favorite Star Trek figures ever made are the ones that had been made back in the day by Art Asylum. And they did a whole line of, excuse me, of original series characters. They then did them as their Wrath of Khan counterparts. They even did a Savick, a Kirstie Alley Savick, in the Wrath of Khan, Monster Maroons. They branched out and they did the whole cast from Next Generation. And I think they even did a few Deep Space Nines figures in the Art Asylum scale. So up until X06's debut with these just gorgeous 12-inch tall figures, those Art Asylums were my favorite. But oh my God, these X06 figures are they're just amazing. They're just amazing.
I mean, I have to get the Wrath of Khan set from the X06.
Yeah,
I love
they're great. And the other nice thing is that yes, they're expensive, but they don't put them all out at one time. This way, okay, one figure a month. If you save your money, you should be able to afford it. I mean, I don't have a ton of money, and I just save up and get them as I can. And it was really smart of Nan to do this, to just release one a month. That way, it's not such a giant financial shock to fans.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Wait until you see the 7 of 9 figure they're going to be putting out.
I saw the sculpt for it, like the
Wasn't
pre-order
it
one. It looks
amazing?
really good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah.
That's also from X06, the 7
Yeah.
of 9.
Yeah. Yep. They have done Tuvok and Janeway, and they're going to do a 7 of 9. And oh my God, have you seen the Commander Cisco from Deep Space Nine?
Yeah, that's on my
just
list to get.
amazing.
The Locutus one too.
amazing.
The Locutus one, I think might be
yeah.
one of the best ones they've done. It
Yeah,
looks.
yeah.
I've got that pre-order, and I can't wait to get that next year.
Yeah. Those are just beautiful. They're just, all of those figures are just amazing. They're just amazing. So I'm very happy to have gotten to help out a little bit in my own way with it. And in the same way, I have to have the Khan figure they're going to put out as part of the Wrath of Khan series. That's the only one that they're doing with rooted hair, because they experimented with doing sculpted hair, and because of the length of the hair, it just didn't look right, and so they're doing actual rooted hair for the Wrath of Khan figure.
Wow, that's a lot. That's interesting.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, like when I got my Admiral Kirk figure and I finally had it in my hot little hands and I'm examining it up close, it's like looking at the paint job on Kirk's hair was amazing, because I'm seeing like 4 or 5 different shades of browns and even a little bit of blonde in his hair in the paint job. And when I asked Nan about it, he says it's because all of the subtle colors go together, but that's what represents real hair, because real hair isn't any just one shade, and because of the highlights of light striking it, it'll look different from here to there. And that, he said, that's why we go through so much attention to detail, because we want it to look as realistic as possible, even though it's just painted hair.
Yeah. Wow. That's excellent. My final question, is we're talking about Star Trek and the different individuals from Star Trek and the figures, and I've got a cat. I've got two cats myself. I've got a
Yeah,
no,
that's my cat. That's my cat, Mr. Binks, deciding to make a guest appearance.
hello,
He
Mr. Binks. Yeah,
he's a stray I took in about 8 years ago.
that's wonderful. We've got an Eli and we've got a Noodle, new cat named Noodle.
Yeah.
Um,
Binks was a stray I took in. I took him to the vet to get him checked up and everything, and he's like 18 pounds of cat.
oh,
And he's named after the cat character from the old Disney Halloween movie, Hocus Pocus, the cat
My
Thackeray
wife's
Binks.
favorite movie.
Yeah, mine too. And so I named him after it. He's such a big, beautiful cat. And he's very, very good boy. He's a good boy.
Nice.
Aw, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
And he was a stray, and we're like, you know what? He's far too friendly to have been a stray. He must have been somebody's abandoned cat, so we took him in.
Yeah, that was good for you guys bringing him. Now he's got a great home. That's excellent.
Oh gosh, yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Binks, you can't get in front of the camera.
You
Anyways,
sh-
I'm
you
sorry.
oh no, all good. You've shared with us your favorite characters from Star Wars as Boba Fett and R2, and I know Zach loves it. I'm sure he loves it that Boba Fett is one of the favorite too. So since we were talking about Star Trek figures and the X06 figures, do you have, amongst all of the Star Trek series, do you have a favorite character?
Uh, it would be a tie between Spock and Data.
Excellent.
I love Spock because, being raised as a kid, I always felt like an outsider. I always felt like I had to work really hard to try and belong to a group of any sort. And for that reason, I always identified with Spock. And I was really smart. Well, I still am really smart. I mean, I was
I was going to say,
recognized.
you're still smart, Max.
I was recognized as being very intelligent at an early age. I'm not saying that to be egotistical. It simply is the fact. Back when I was a kid in third grade here in the state of California, they used to give everybody in school standardized IQ tests. And in the third grade, I tested out as having the IQ at 135, which is like a few points, like 5 points below genius level. And they would send us children who tested out really high to a private school run by the government for mentally gifted children. And I tested out as having the reading and comprehension ability of a second year college student when I was in the third grade. I would just blow through books. I loved reading. And I still do to this day. I don't trust anybody who doesn't at least own books. You don't have to read them all the time, but I don't trust people who don't love and own books. Um, and I think, like I said, I've always felt like kind of a bit of an outsider because of my interest in science fiction and making things and whatnot. And so I think I've always identified with those people who are of the outside, and that's why I identify with Spock and Data so much. Um, Data has a much harder time of it than Spock, of course, because at least Spock is half human, so he kind of gets it sometimes, but Data has it even harder. He's just a blank slate to everything around him, all experiences. Even, I mean, we know that Data's been around for at least a good 10, 15 years or so because he talks about having gone through Starfleet Academy. I can only imagine he probably went through it though pretty quick because he absorbs everything instantly. But still, even in his limited time of being activated, he still has a hard time with understanding just the normal nuances of getting about in society. And as a kid, I also had problems like that. I used to call it that I was socially blind. I didn't catch on to the nuances of social cues about things like, oh, well, the conversation has ended because such and such and such and such has happened. And I guess as a kid, I was a little bit much to put up with. And yeah, so for that reason, I think probably Data and Spock are my two favorite characters.
Those are beautiful reasons too. Yeah. Thank you. Very insightful. Thank you for sharing
Sure.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Max, I could literally sit here and talk to you for hours and hours and hours and hours with all the stuff all the things you've done, all the great information you've shared. I know our listeners will absolutely love this too, because there's so much great stuff that people don't know, and that's one of many reasons why we wanted to have you on here, was just for you to be able to share those experiences and be able to, like kind of you said before, record them so that others can hear them, so they're never lost. They're always out there. And we really do thank you so much for your time. I know that you're a busy man and you got so much going on, and we do appreciate so much for you to come on and share all this stuff with us and with those listening all over the globe.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time to contact me and set this whole thing up. I mean, yeah, and especially during the holidays, things get extra busy with everybody,
Yep.
So, but yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time and having me on. So,
Yeah, well, we loved it. This was amazing, Chris. I did tell you that my friends who introduced me to Max said that he is a resource and a wealth of such great information. And boy, we got a lot of awesome stuff tonight.
Yeah.
James and Tommy told you
Yep.
that, huh?
Yep, they did.
Yeah.
Well,
They did.
James and Tommy are such a couple of sweet guys. They've really become really good friends of mine, and I kind of love them like they're my little brothers.
Aw.
Because
Yeah.
I'm a lot older than them. I'm 62. I think that they're barely in their 40s. So,
Yeah.
I will say, like, so just so that Max, I really am thankful for everything that you and your teams worked on, because the stuff that you worked on. So, Masters of the Universe, I loved growing up, and Captain Power, and the Soldier of the Future. I know that show too, so I was like, oh, that was great, and of course, everything Star Trek and Babylon. I'm still working on watching Babylon 5, but all of those, are just they're great. They're just those contributions to the fan and the science fiction community, and what we have is just a treasure. So it's 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 great. And
well, thank you. And I feel very honored that I got to work on so many things that have become iconic and so cherished by so many fans. I consider myself very lucky that I got to work on so many of these things.
Yeah, Star Trek's a massive, massive part of my life. So thank you for being an influence on that, because it's shaped a big part of who I am. And so thank you for your contributions to the amazing franchise that it is, and all the hard work and long hours that you put in.
Oh, well, thank you all. Thank you very much. And of course, live long and prosper.
Absolutely. So yes, thank you so much, everybody, for listening. This has been fantastic. We hope that you have enjoyed listening to Max and the wealth of information he has, all the great nuances and stories that he shared with us on this episode. Be sure to go on Facebook and Instagram and check us out there if you haven't already, and mark this episode as a favorite, because you're going to want to come back and listen to this after you've gone back and watched Beetlejuice again, or watch Star Trek or Starship Troopers again, to see all the things that Max has been talking about. So
And
thank you.
if you want even more information, I have my own podcast, the Max Effects podcast,
Yes.
which is part of the Skywalking podcast network. And I go into even greater detail in those different episodes.
Yeah, be sure to go look that up. In fact, you can find them on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. The Max EFX is the name of the podcast. So be sure to go on there, because he has a lot more fantastic details to provide. I've listened to a couple of the episodes and they really are great.
Well, thank you again for having me, guys.
Yes, thank you very much, Max. Thank you to all you listening, as always, and we look forward to another episode soon right here on the Random Redshirt Podcast.